one that's timely and well needed. So thank you for joining us. And we'll be right back with the start in just a moment. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our town hall. We're going to get started in just a minute. For those of you who just joined us, we're waiting to get more of a critical mass on the live stream before we get started. So if you'll hold tight, we'll get started very shortly. Okay. Well, welcome to today's town hall. Today we're going to have a town hall called the ERA Factor: Reproductive Rights, Health, and Justice. Thank you for joining us for this very important discussion and what we hope will be an informative event. This is part of our series that we initiated to inform an educated community of ERA supporters and to demonstrate how the Equal Rights Amendment affects every aspect of our social, economic, and political lives. This past weekend, we just marked what should have been the 50th anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision, which provided a constitutional right to abortion access. Instead, we're now living in a post-Dobbs era. The decision is an outrageous attack on nearly 50 years of women organizing their lives around the right to abortion. We believe that the ERA is now more important than ever. The ability to determine when or whether to have a child has allowed women to participate fully in our society, politics, and economy. But before we get started, just want to share some quick housekeeping notes. If you're having sound issues on Eventbrite, please click on the Zoom logo to watch directly from Zoom. We are also live streaming this discussion on our YouTube and Facebook pages, so you can grab those links. We'll put them in the chat. And we have enabled closed captioning for viewers here on Zoom. You can turn on captions by clicking Show Subtitle under More options on your screen. If you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A panel. We'll save time at the end of the discussion today for those questions. And we know that we don't yet have constitutional equality. It's all of our job to educate the American public on the need for the Equal Rights Amendment and how we can get it across the finish line. That's where you come in. After this town hall, make sure to talk about the ERA with your friends and networks and tell them how important it is that we get sex equality into the Constitution. We need the ERA now more than ever. So now let's get started. I'll begin by thanking and introducing our esteemed panel of experts. First up, we have Layla Abou-Falzi. She is the Director of Federal Reproductive Rights at the National Women's Law Center. Layla works on a range of issues involving the protection and expansion of reproductive rights at the federal level. Before joining the National Women's Law Center in 2011, she was a senior associate at WilmerHale in Washington, D.C. From 2016 to 2018, she was a teaching fellow at Georgetown University Law Center, returning to the National Women's Law Center after completing the fellowship. Layla is a graduate of Emory University and Georgetown University Law Center. Layla, thank you for joining us. David Cohen is a professor of law at Drexel University's Klein School of Law, where he teaches constitutional law, sex discrimination and the law, and reproductive rights and justice. He's a co-author of 2 books about abortion: Living in the Crosshairs, The Untold Stories of Anti-Abortion Terrorism, and Obstacle Course, The Everyday Struggle to Get an Abortion in America. He is on the board of the Abortion Care Network and works with the Women's Law Project, representing abortion providers in Pennsylvania in various legal matters. With his current co-authors, he has spearheaded the movement of abortion-supportive states to adopt shield provisions, laws that protect abortion providers and patients from anti-abortion state efforts to punish them. With us also, we have thank you, David. With us also, we have Marcella Howell. She is the founder and president, CEO of the In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, a national state partnership with the goal of lifting up the voices of Black women leaders on issues that impact their lives and the lives of their families. Marcella is the author of Walk in My Shoes, a Black activist guide to surviving the women's movement, a collection of inspirational essays to help young Black women navigate the women's movement and empower them to become leaders in the fight for reproductive justice. Marcella, thank you for joining us today. So today our experts will help us explore the connection between the Equal Rights Amendment and the right to personal bodily autonomy, the right to have children or not, to parent children in safe and sustainable communities, including access to healthcare for pregnant and newly parenting persons. To move us into our discussion, let's get rolling with Marcella. As an architect of the reproductive justice movement, what does reproductive justice mean, and why is this framing important?
Well, reproductive justice is the human right to control our bodies, our sexuality, our gender, our work, our reproduction. It's a right that can only be achieved when all women and girls have the complete economic, social, and political power and resources to make decisions about our bodies, our families, and our communities in all areas of our lives. It is grounded in a human rights framework and in Black feminist theory. In Our Own Voice uses both the framework and the feminist theory to center the voices of Black women, femmes, girls, and gender expansive people to transform the oppressive systems that hinder our ability to reclaim our own lives. As a reproductive justice organization, In Our Own Voice approaches policy issues from a human rights perspective that incorporates the intersections of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and gender identity with situational impacts of economics, politics, and culture that make up the lived experiences of Black women and other women of color in this country.
Awesome, thank you. Layla and David, would you like to share anything about this framing as a way of enhancing politics that support women's personal bodily autonomy?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and always just a deep thank you to Marcella for always leading so clearly and speaking so clearly about what truly lays ahead of us in terms of not only restoring rights, but making sure some of the rights that we've had for a while, people actually get to fully experience them, which our history in the US is one where not everybody has. So I just want to, underscore everything that Marcella just said, and really that we are not going to restore access to abortion until we really go through the path that Marcella just laid. And if you look at, for example, the impact of our policies across a person's lives, as Marcella, her organization, intersections of our lives, actually so well lays out. Think about Mississippi, the state at the center of the case that overturned, where the Supreme Court used to overturn Roe. Mississippi in the last year has been in the news for a terrible maternal mortality crisis that affects Black women more. They had a major water crisis repeatedly, and parents, moms can't send their kids to school in this water crisis because there's no water in the school. So when you think about this fuller case of Mississippi, and the Attorney General said, gender equality has been secured here and there's nothing to see here, folks. And then you look at their broader policies, including that they have not expanded Medicaid, which impacts all of this. You see exactly what Marcella is saying about all these things that come together. And so abortion is a thread through line on that, but it is not the only thread through. So I appreciate how she laid it out. I think it really makes it clear.
David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just quickly, the two things that I think to add. One is that the beauty of reproductive justice, thinking about all reproductive decisions that people make over their lifetime, is that we know that about 1 in 4 people who have the capability of being pregnant will have an abortion during the reproductive years. But almost everyone is going to think about what they want in terms of their reproductive life. And so appealing to everyone and the interest that everyone has in making sure that everyone has reproductive autonomy and freedom, and the ability to bring about the choices that they want, I think broadens beyond just talking about abortion, and can bring in some allies that an abortion-focused movement might not be able to have. And second, really focusing on the people who are impacted the most by policies, and that's poor women, rural women, Black women, and other women of color, that it really sort of shines the light on how oppressive the policies around reproduction in this country are. And so I think those are two other things that really make this movement and framework so valuable.
And I really am looking forward to diving into the bigger picture of what bodily autonomy means, especially when we talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, but keeping in mind that it's not just it's abortion, but reproductive rights and justice about the full spectrum of reproductive cycles. So thank you for that, and thank you for the context. So Layla, you've been on the gender justice front lines, along with others on the panel, leading us forward long before the post-Dobbs era. So for folks who are new to this discussion, and those of us who are not so new, remind us of the devastation that this decision is having and playing out in communities across the nation. What have been the overall experiences of women and pregnant persons as they seek access to reproductive health care, including access to abortion?
Yeah, thank you for this. I am sure many of you have been following the news, and you can't really overstate how bad things are. These are intersecting public health and legal intersecting crises coming at the same time. Our country, for the past 50 years, 49, operated with the assumption of a legal right to abortion. And so all of our infrastructure, our systems, our legal systems, all were dependent on this. And so you take this out, and we have such scary questions of what is legal liability for a lot of folks, and instilling a lot of fear in our communities and then across medical personnel. So what it's looking like is, you've probably seen, read stories of people who are miscarrying and have threats to their lives, forced to travel, or forced to experience excruciating pain. You saw the story about a young girl who was raped and needed care, and the political bullies who went after her and continue to go after her provider. What you may be hearing less about, but it is happening. And think about the intersection of whose stories we can share, given that we're in this time of unknown with legal liability, is those stories of people in states where abortion is banned. And so there are stories of people safely managing at home. There are stories of people traveling through multiple states to get abortion care at a clinic. And you hear those stories from the providers, look at their parking lot, they have license plates from all over. And then you hear stories of people who hit hurdle after hurdle, living in states without care, and they continued their pregnancy. And this is not what they were looking to do, but it is the story that's hard to capture, except to know that there are many who, after Googling around, not finding a clinic in their state, not finding a friend who will take them across state, not having time off from work, childcare, all of these things, they're forced to carry a pregnancy to term. And so if you think about the fear and the chaos and the physical and mental harm that's already happened, we have concrete data about what happens to people when they are denied abortion care that they seek. We have the clear impacts on their well-being, their health, their ability to thrive, economic security. We have the research, we have the science, but really all that reflects what is so innate to people, is that the person knows best what's going to happen to them, and that's why they're seeking care. And when we deny that, the things that are obvious that will happen. So it is really dark, but really want to emphasize that communities are showing up for each other. Abortion funds, abortion clinics, they're showing up every day, and it's really been critical, but it is a public health disaster.
One of the things I like to remind people as the counter side of the abortion argument is forced pregnancy. Like, we don't like to talk about forced pregnancy, but especially as a Black woman, realizing the history behind that, the history behind the sexual violence that usually occurs with that. And that just adds another layer that I don't think many people really think about outside of this space. So just keeping that in mind, I think is very valuable, because it just frames the issue in a very, very different way when we talk about the ability to make your own decisions for yourself and your family. Marcella, what do you see in your experience working with folks in our own voice network?
Well, the thing about the network that we have, the partnerships that we have, is we're hearing directly from the states. We're hearing from people who are working with women to find healthcare. And many of those states are in the South, where abortion is being banned. We have a partner in Louisiana, we have a partner in Georgia, in Texas. And they literally, it's not just trying to help women to find access to healthcare, but it's also, if they are advocacy organizations, this level of fear about what their legal liability will be.
Yeah.
If they actually help. In Texas especially, Texas has this law that basically says anyone can sue anyone if they think that they contributed to helping someone get an abortion. So if you are an abortion fund, you have to worry about whether or not a phone call that you receive asking for funds to go to another state is being monitored, whether or not you're going to all of a sudden face somebody suing you, even if you haven't done anything yet. You run under that. You worry about what happens if you help somebody, if you drive someone to another state. What kind of liability do you face? The reality is that parents who talk to their children about abortion could be in jeopardy. A minister that is consulted by someone trying to decide whether they want to terminate a pregnancy could be impacted by someone suing them. I mean, the law is so onerous that it really is having a chilling effect on people, not just people who are concerned about where they should go, but anyone who thinks about helping them make that decision or consulting with them or a friend. People have been put into these positions by these laws, which are just outrageous. And as you mentioned, this idea of bodily autonomy, especially for Black women who have faced, slavery, Jim Crow, the welfare system, monitoring what they do with their bodies, how they build their families. That's the history in this country. And so reproductive justice is about that, saying that I, as a human being, should have the right to make these decisions. And these laws that we're seeing being passed throughout these states basically say, no, you don't. You don't have that right. And they only impact people who can give birth. And that's a big problem.
And one of the things I'd like to point out is that the Texas law is actually based on the fugitive slave law. So if you want to look at the history right there, that shows you where you're coming from, and that gives a whole nother lens to the work. And you're absolutely right. Like who benefits from forced pregnancy? The same people who did when we were slaves, right? Who benefits from the ability to have bodily autonomy? And it's not people who would actually have power in this country, and that's intentional. So all of this is intentional. None of this is by accident, right? We didn't get here 50 years later by accident. This was all very intentional, and we'll get into that, especially since, as you mentioned, the states that have the most pernicious laws are also the states where there's the highest maternal mortality for Black and brown women. That's not a coincidence. It all plays in together, and I know we'll get into that a little bit deeper later. David, I'd like to bring you into the conversation a little bit more. The states are a hotbed of activity that's designed to curtail reproductive freedom and rights. In Pennsylvania, you're at the front and center as the co-counsel of the Allegheny Reproductive Health Center versus the Pennsylvania Department of Social Services, which is the case before the state Supreme Court that challenges Pennsylvania's ban on using Medicaid funds for abortions by using the Pennsylvania Equal Rights Amendment. So just to emphasize to everyone, this is the state's own Equal Rights Amendment, not the federal Equal Rights Amendment. So if you could tell us briefly about the case and why it's important to our efforts to secure a federal Equal Rights Amendment.
In the wake of what the U.S. Supreme Court did, we are going to see a lot more attention paid to state Supreme Courts and state constitutions. So every state has its own constitution and their own court system, and states can interpret their own constitutions in their own ways and use their own doctrines and their own unique histories to give meaning to those provisions. We saw just a couple weeks ago, on the same day, the South Carolina Supreme Court found a right to abortion in their state constitution's protection for privacy, while the Idaho Supreme Court found the opposite under its constitution. So state Supreme Courts are a battlefield. Here in Pennsylvania, where I am co-counsel with folks at the Women's Law Project and Planned Parenthood Federation of America and a private firm representing all of the standalone clinics in the state. And we are suing to invalidate the Hyde Amendment, the state version of the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is a federal law that bans the use of Medicaid dollars to pay for people's abortion. And so what this does is it really impacts people who would otherwise be who are otherwise unable to pay for an abortion. That's the whole point of Medicaid, is that it covers health insurance for people who are low income. And they're able to get other reproductive health care, but not abortion. This has been part of federal law since 1976, and 33 states have their own version of this. Pennsylvania is one of them. It's been around for decades. And what we are claiming in this case is that the state Equal Rights Amendment, 28 states have their own Equal Rights Amendment. Pennsylvania is one of them. That under the state Equal Rights Amendment, this is unconstitutional. And we're making a couple different claims. One, that this is based on sex stereotypes that the proper role of women in society is that they should give birth and be mothers. That the real essence of the Hyde Amendment is, and the sort of anti-abortion laws generally, is this sex stereotype about the role of women in society. A second claim that we are making under the Equal Rights Amendment is that the Pennsylvania Medicaid covers all reproductive health care for men, but not all reproductive health care for women, because there is no sex-specific health care related to reproduction that is carved out of the state Medicaid program for men. But this, healthcare that is associated with being a woman is carved out of the state Medicaid program. That is an equal rights problem, as we see it. And so that's part of our argument. We have other arguments too, under other parts of the Pennsylvania Constitution, that the Medicaid ban approves of one exercise of a fundamental right, carrying a pregnancy to term, deciding you want a kid, but harms another exercise of a fundamental right because it penalizes someone who chooses to have an abortion. That should be unconstitutional. That's another aspect of it that's unconstitutional. We have to overturn a 1985 case that was decided by the same Supreme Court. And so we lost in the lower courts. We knew we would because they had to follow that case. We argued the case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in October, and we expect a decision anywhere from tomorrow to the end of the year. We don't know these things. They don't tell you. It's not like the US Supreme Court where you know that all cases will be decided by the end of June. Usually state Supreme Courts are more like the Wild West and you have no idea what they're going to do, when they're going to do it. So we are holding our breath every day to see when we find out. And we are optimistic, although certainly we have no guarantee that we are going to win. And importantly, like the South Carolina case, like the Idaho case, whatever the Pennsylvania Supreme Court does cannot be appealed to the US Supreme Court. When a state Supreme Court rules based on its constitution, it cannot be appealed to the US Supreme Court. So we don't have to worry about the court that decided Dobbs. All we have to worry about are the justices in Pennsylvania interpreting Pennsylvania law.
I think that's a really important reminder because as everyone who's on this call probably can attest to, this Supreme Court would not uphold any affirming decision. So thank you, Pennsylvania, and I hope we're keeping a close eye on it because it has so many implications for what could be done at the federal level. I just want to underline the hypocrisy of the fact that you can use Medicaid to pay for all male reproductive services, but not for services for pregnant people. So that's just hypocrisy in our laws. So thank you for that. We are now going to move on to Congresswoman Judy Chu. Unfortunately, she's unable to join us in person due to the tragic shooting in her district. She's in district right now, working with her constituents. But we're excited to have remarks that she prepared for us. She represents California's 28th district, which includes Pasadena and the West San Gabriel Valley of Southern California. She currently serves on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, the House Small Business Committee, as well as the House Budget Committee. Congresswoman Chu is the lead sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act. Congresswoman Chu has served as a local and state elected official, including as a school board and city council member, the 3 times elected mayor to Monterey Park City Council, in the California State Assembly and as a member of the State Board of Equalization. In 2009, she became the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history. Congresswoman Chu is going to share more information on the importance of legislation to protect reproductive health access and what that looks like in the 118th Congress.
Hello, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, and I want to thank Jennifer Tucker and the entire ERA Coalition for the invitation today. Unfortunately, I'm unable to attend in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to update you on my bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, or what we call WIPA, and how we can all continue to fight to restore abortion rights in the 118th Congress and beyond. We know the importance of enshrining the Equal Rights Amendment into our Constitution. And we know life free from discrimination means a life free from infringements on our bodily autonomy. That's why it's important for my bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, to become the law of the land. In the days following the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision to eviscerate the rights of half the American population, I've never seen such terror from my constituents or such anger and outrage. They were horrified by the Supreme Court's actions. Today, women have less rights than their grandmothers because of 6 unelected judges and far-right extremist politicians. Today, 1/3 of women live in states where abortion is banned. It was this outrage that inspired me to join with activists from across the country to participate in an act of civil disobedience and be arrested in front of the Supreme Court in protest of this horrific decision. But we have the power to restore the rights we had for 50 years. The answer is pass my bill, WIPA. It enshrines the protections of Roe into law by doing 2 things: creating a federal right to access abortion care in this country, and it ensures that states may not erode that right. The attacks on reproductive freedom and discrimination on the basis of sex did not start with Dobbs, as the ERA Coalition knows all too well. This has been a decades-long effort by anti-abortion extremists whose ultimate goal is to ban abortion entirely in this country. Since 2010, hundreds of laws have been introduced in states across the country with the goal of chipping away at abortion access. WIPA was designed not just to create a federal right to abortion care, but to push back against these state-based attacks on providers and seekers. In the 117th Congress, Speaker Pelosi put WIPA on the floor in fall of 2021, following the terrible Texas abortion bounty hunter bill, SB 8, and again after the Dobbs decision last summer. WIPA is now the most supported pro-abortion bill in congressional history, showing how important it is to have a Democratic pro-choice majority in Congress. WIPA received 49 votes in the Senate, indicating just how close we are to passing this bill into law. And President Biden has promised to sign the bill into law if it is able to reach his desk. I want you to know I am working to reintroduce WIPA again in the coming weeks. We are making important updates to the language to ensure that it reflects the reality of a post-Dobbs America and ensure that in a world without Roe, abortion access is protected everywhere. Unfortunately, because of the Republican House majority, WIPA faces a steep odds of passage in the 118th Congress. Distressingly, even after Dobbs, restricting abortion rights remains one of the primary legislative goals for the Republican House majority. In their first legislative week of the new Congress, Republican leadership brought not 1 but 2 anti-abortion bills to the floor. Let's be clear. Republicans' ultimate goal is to institute a national abortion ban in every state, and these bills were just the first of their many legislative vehicles that will pave the way. Well, I'm in the long haul on this right and on this fight, and the larger fight for an America free of discrimination on the basis of sex. I'm glad you all are in this fight as well. Thank you again for today's invitation.
And we thank the Congresswoman for her service and also for her support of the Equal Rights Amendment, which I actually want to turn to now that we've laid the groundwork for what the state of abortion access and reproductive justice is in America. So I'll open this up to the panel. In your opinion, how do you think having the Equal Rights Amendment in the US Constitution will change the experiences of women and pregnant people who are trying to access reproductive health care and services, including abortion, contraceptives, and maternal health care? If so, how? And Layla, I'll bring you back into this if you want to kick us off with that question.
Sure, Marcella, do you want? I saw you come off.
Marcella took herself. Yeah, go ahead, Marcella.
I unmuted myself because I thought that question you asked was a great segue from something that David was saying. The Equal Rights Amendment is about human rights. Mm-hmm. It is in its own iteration, it is part of what reproductive justice groups see as a much more equitable treatment for people of color. The reality is, David mentioned the Hyde Amendment. I mean, the Supreme Court decided on Roe in 1973, and 3 years later, the Congress implemented an amendment to its appropriation bills that essentially said, sure, women who can pay for this can get abortions, but women who rely on Medicaid can't. And, Henry Hyde's whole thing was, I really wanted to ban abortion for all women, but I took a hit at the ones that I could impact, which of course were poor women. And that was basically women of color. And that Hyde Amendment has been placed on funding bills every single year since 1973, including this year. And so for certain women, and the reason why reproductive justice was developed and coined is because Black women did not see Roe v. Wade as the ceiling. It was the floor. There were so many other things that were putting up barriers to them accessing abortion services. And so the Equal Rights Amendment would help to ease that, because it is based on a human rights perspective. And in saying that, you put something in the Constitution, the state constitutions will have the final say, not the Supreme Court.
Yes, women or people who have means, people who have wealth will always find a way to exercise their right to an abortion. I mean, let's just face it. The Dobbs decision may have changed in some states, but if you have the money to go to another state or to another country, you can still do it. So keeping in mind who this is really targeting is, I think, imperative. Layla, how about you now?
Sure, and thanks, Marcella. And I'm really glad David got to talk about their incredible litigation in Pennsylvania. We've been so excited for it because it really gives us the grounding to talk about the ERA as it gets to reproductive rights, because it really at its core is about sex stereotyping. When West Virginia was considering its ban on abortion, it included alongside it a resolution all about how women are mothers. And so if you go to the core about what this is about, it is putting people into boxes of what they should be, right? Mm-hmm. And not giving people the ability to define for themselves who they are. Professor Melissa Murray has an incredible op-ed from last summer, We're Losing Our Right to Be, about being whatever I can be many things, and you can't put me in a box, but these bans are really rooted in that. And so when you think about how Marcella just laid out the intersecting then stereotypes you get and how all of this is layered, the ERA gets to the core of equality. And what does equality mean when you put together the pieces of the puzzle? So it is through your ability to exercise bodily autonomy, freedom, self-fulfillment, your destiny, right? That is the equality we're seeking to, and the ERA allows us to talk about that broader sense of equality, that we can make these decisions can define our paths, our opportunities, define when to become a parent, the things men, particularly white men, have done for millennia. And so when we really probe what is equality, we talk about the things we need to be given the ability to pursue our futures and our destinies. And I just want to take a note that actually this framing really helps us to also pursue a broader movement of rejecting attacks on abortion, on contraception, against trans folks, against non-binary, because the whole point is they want you to be a certain sex. And that is what they're doing here. They are trying to attack us because they want to define what us. And so really at the core, the ERA is giving you the right to say who you are and being able to live freely in that way. So that's how I see, and abortion access is a key to that. So
I'm so glad you brought that up, because we face that within our own movement. But the bottom line is those who are benefiting from the current system are trying to keep us siloed and say that, well, you're this kind of person, you're that kind of person, so that those differences they can play up, when really we have so much more in common than what separates us. But if they focus on the differences, we are not as powerful as we are when we work together. So for anyone who says that, well, it's only these kind of women, that doesn't help our cause, because then what you're saying is those divisions are more important, and you don't really understand and appreciate that we're all in this together, and that my rights are very much so intertwined with the rights of my sisters, my brothers, everyone around me, because at the end of the day, if one of us is oppressed, then we all are. So I'm really glad that you brought that to the conversation. David, any thoughts on how the Equal Rights Amendment would impact access, reproductive care, the like?
ERA is, I mean, at core, it basically says that we as a society are committed to letting people fully participate in society, regardless of their sex. And really, for anyone who's not a white man, who doesn't have the privilege of race and sex in this country, that we want everyone to be able to participate equally. And the defining aspect of being able to participate fully in society is being able to control your reproduction and to control your sexual life and your sexual being and your reproductive being, because it takes up so much of people's lifespan to be able to think about reproduction. And if you can't control that yourself, that means someone else is controlling that, either another private individual against your consent or the government against your consent. And if you can't be the one controlling that, if you want to have lots of kids and raise them as you wish, then you should be able to do that. But the government shouldn't be the one telling you to do that. Because if the government is telling you to do that, or another person is telling you to do that, then you aren't participating the way you want in society. And I think that's sort of the message of the ERA, that we want women and others, gender non-binary people, to be able to fully participate in society in a way that this country has never before fulfilled, despite some promises that we think that we sort of, we think the revolution and the feminist revolution in the 60s and 70s solved all this, but it hasn't. And the ERA won't by itself solve these problems, far from it, but it will be another sort of notch in saying that we are committed to this, and a tool for advocates to use in trying to have this country live up to that important promise that almost every other modern democracy has embedded in its constitution. We don't.
Yeah, and let's not forget who the Constitution was written for and by. It wasn't me, Marcella. It wasn't you, Layla. It wasn't you, David. Might have been you. I don't know. But we have to keep in mind that context, that in order for us to have our rights, we can't take for granted the ones that we currently do. Voting rights being one, bodily autonomy being another. And discrimination across the board. So thank you for reminding us of the importance of our laws are the foundation for the situation we're in. And in order to change them, we need to change our laws. And the Equal Rights Amendment is one powerful step to doing that. So David, I'll stay with you for a moment. So you're involved in a movement to assist states in adopting shield provisions or laws that protect abortion providers and patients from anti-abortion state efforts to punish them. What states have you had the most success, and why do you attribute that? What do you attribute that success to?
In the wake of Dobbs, there's been a lot of attention paid to the way that a bunch of states, right now we're at 14 states that have banned abortion. Another 7 states have abortion bans on the books that have been put on hold by their state courts and may come into being soon, there's been a lot of attention rightfully paid to what's happening in those states. But other states that are that support abortion rights and support reproductive justice are fighting back. And they're saying, we're going to do the best we can to enhance abortion access in our states by funding abortion providers, by funding abortion travelers, by getting rid of barriers that exist. Even some of the most liberal states still have barriers on the books to make it harder to access an abortion. We're going to get rid of those. And in particular for shield laws, we are going to make sure that providers and supporters and helpers who help those traveling into the states where abortion remains legal, that they are going to be legally protected as much as the state can. They're going to protect them from any of the pernicious efforts of the anti-abortion states. Because unfortunately, we are going to see states like Texas and Oklahoma try to stop their patients, their citizens, from traveling through a variety of means, and that could bring in abortion providers and helpers in, say, Illinois. They could try to they might be prosecuted or sued, and so shield laws prevent those out-of-state actions from stopping people traveling. We've seen these enacted already in 7 states: Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, Illinois, and California. Vermont, Washington, and Colorado are considering these bills. And it's really their very clear message that we are supporting people who provide abortions in our state and those who travel to our state to get the care that they should be able to get in their home state. But if they're going to come to our state, we are going to try to protect them as much as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you for that work. Marcella, in our own voice, contraceptive equality is a major concern. Can you tell us what contraceptive equity is a major concern? Can you tell us what contraceptive equity is and why it's a major focus of your organization?
Sure. The reality is that accessing contraceptives has never been easy. And one of the things that we've done at our organization is we've done focus groups and polling, asking people about their experiences in getting contraception, what kind they've used, what kind of experience they've had going in. And what we found is people will always say, well, number one, Black women have gone through a number of different kinds of contraceptions, contraceptive methods. And what they find is, what they'll say to us is, I went in for looking for birth control pills and I came out with an IUD. Or I went in looking for birth control and I came out with a shot. Because people don't listen to them. They'll go in and say, this is what I want, and then they'll be talked into something else without being told why they should have that something else. And very often what happens is healthcare professionals will make assumptions about them. They'll come in and they'll ask them how many kids they have. And this also goes to something that David said. Person will say, well, I have 3. And they'll go, well, you have 3 kids and you're only in your 20s. Maybe you should have, and they'll give them a prescription of what they should be taking. And without asking whether or not this is something they've decided that they really want to have. I want to have 5 kids. I want to have them close together so that, there's not ages apart and they have brothers and sisters. Or they'll say, well, I can't take this kind of thing. And this is how for Black women and women who were living in Puerto Rico, this is how we ended up having experiments of contraceptives, that people just tried them out before they used them for a larger population, which was predominantly white women. So we were always the experiment. And so what contraceptive equity means is not only having access, but having full information. So again, it goes to bodily autonomy. It's called, they need to explain to you all the pros and cons of every form of contraception so that you can make your own decision. And once you've made your own decision, they should respect that decision that you've made. That's what contraceptive equity is about. And that's why we really push it so much is that we want to make sure that healthcare providers are listening to the clients who come into their offices and understand what they want, not necessarily what the healthcare professional thinks they need. And so it is again a question of reproductive justice and bodily autonomy.
So if I can just share a quick anecdote. So my grandmother gave birth to her children in the Bronx in an era wherein she had 3 kids in very close succession in her 20s. And after the fourth child, she wasn't able to have kids anymore. And we don't know whether or not she chose to be sterile or if the doctor made that decision for her because he thought it was the right thing to do. And she's not alone in that having that decision made for her. So this is not something new. It's something we've been dealing with as a community. And I think more people need to speak truth to that because.
And it still exists today.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's just.
We're still not listening
yes.
to.
So I just wanted to bring that up because I mean, that's a personal story in my family that I didn't learn until I was, my later years, but still like, this is something that we need to have more conversations around. Layla, David, do you want to chime in?
I can just say one thing, all you just said, I don't need to repeat, but go back to something that Marcella said very early on, that this all relates to our national narrative about these healthcare items and healthcare services, and that, the barriers to contraception are there and they're increasing because they're under attack. And so let's not think that the right to birth control is not also under threat. It is. And, we are shocked at what happened last summer. A district judge in Texas could take away medication abortion off the market in a few short weeks. You could lose the right to birth control. So take nothing for granted, but part of the work that folks in our movement do too is to make sure that we are positively and with forward-looking values talking about these needs, that abortion is healthcare, that abortion is normal, that birth control is healthcare, and that you can use many different types. You could go off birth control. And so what I just want to say about how a conversation about equality can really drive that is that who is controlling the narrative of what we need and what we speak, and that if you think about the restrictions that have been on healthcare over the years, there's restrictions on women's healthcare in a way that it is rooted truly in these paternalistic views about us. And so when we talk about what our needs are, I just saw a whole thread on maternal, like your delivery stories. They're not rosy. We each have a story to tell. And for so long, people haven't been able to tell the story. So just like you shared, Zakiya, like you have a story that they weren't sharing. And there's so much stigma and shame attached to it. And so part of the movement forward is to tear this down and be like, this is my life. Like, I don't care what your judgment is. This is what it is. And that's a piece of the pie of moving forward too.
So when you said that contraception is under attack, Justice Thomas's concurring opinion laid that out very clearly for us. And David, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but he did say what's next. And so it's up to us to defend against it. David?
Yeah, I mean, the main opinion in Dobbs really sort of said this opinion is just about abortion, but it explicitly said that, but the logic throughout the opinion was much broader. It was about anything related to personal autonomy, personal bodily autonomy. And Justice Thomas, who I disagree with on almost everything, I thought at least he was being honest in his separate opinion. He said, look, this opinion that was written by my colleague that I signed on to, it would mean we would get rid of all of these other rights related to birth control, related to marriage, related to interracial marriage, same-sex marriage, other bodily autonomy rights. So let's do it. And so to his credit, he was at least laying his cards on the table and being honest about it, whereas the rest of the majority, they were really being incredibly dishonest, gaslighting by saying, hey, here's all the ways that we're going to get rid of personal rights to abortion in the Constitution that have to do with everything else, but it's just about abortion. They were completely lying about that. And Justice Thomas, they probably weren't happy that he wrote that because they wanted to hide behind what they were doing. But he shined a light on it, and we're seeing it with what Layla said. The attacks on birth control are here already. The judge in Texas last month, the same one who's hearing the mifepristone case that Layla talked about, the judge in Texas last month said that Title X healthcare providers cannot provide birth control to minors without the consent of their parents. For decades, Title X clinics have been providing confidential birth control to minors. It's the main way that minors are able to get birth control. And this judge said, no, that violates parents' rights. And so in Texas now, minors can't access confidential birth control at Title X clinics. Birth control is under attack, maybe not in the same way as it was 60 years ago, but it's under attack in these new ways, and Dobbs provides ammunition.
I would like to point out that Justice Thomas did not mention interracial marriage in his concurring opinion, given that he is in an interracial marriage and that would directly impact him. So I just want to be clear that he did see there is some hypocrisy there too, but we have new measures in place that will protect us. So I'm going to hand it over to Chrissy for the Q&A portion. So we're going to take some questions from our audience, and we'll go from there. Chrissy?
Thank you so much, Zakia. We have quite a few. Our first question is from Chris. He asks, who are the elected figures that we need to contact to get this as law? That might actually be a Zakia question.
Yes, I was just going to answer that one. So we are working with members of Congress to pass legislation that would remove the time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment. And so reach out to your senator, reach out to your congressperson, and let them know that you believe and you support equality and that they should too. And I strongly believe that if people don't support equality, then we need to send them a message, because if we support it and they represent us and they don't, then that's a misrepresentation. So understanding that we have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have independents. As long as you support equality, we are with you. But if you are not supporting equality and the broader concepts that we believe in with equity and equality, I'm ready to show some folks the door. But for the most part, contact your senators and contact your members of Congress.
Can I chime in with one more idea, which is that in particular, the senators have a unique role in confirming the U.S. archivist. The archivist is an obscure position within the federal government, but they have a major role in publishing amendments to the U.S. Constitution. President Biden, the archivist who had been nominated by President Obama, retired last year. And there's a nominee, Colleen Shogan, who's on the floor right now as a nominee. And she could get through the Senate. And if they confirm her and there's pressure put on her and President Biden, she could issue a very powerful statement that the ERA, as ratified by 38 states, is already a part of the Constitution. It doesn't mean the courts would have to follow it, but it would be a powerful step. And so she remains unconfirmed. It should be a priority of the Democratic Senate to confirm her, and then pressure put on a president who supports the ERA to have the archivist that he nominates recognize the ERA as part of the Constitution.
Thank you. Chrissy, next question.
That'll do it. We have more statement, I think, than a question, but I mean, I think it's rhetorical. Are the courts going to take care of these children that were not wanted because the mother was unable to get an abortion? And then she shares her own abortion story from 35 years ago. If you live in the South and if your life is in danger and you don't get an abortion, our governor says, too bad, you have to die, no abortion, no way. So just sharing that. We have a question from Monica. Would the current USSC even recognize a right to abortion under a federal ERA?
I would say no, but David, you being the David and Layla, I think you guys might want to chime in there.
David, I don't think we can both answer. I mean, I think that goes to the broader point I made about the work here is not just the legal, it is the narrative work, and it is the work of changing this country more writ large about what it means to be an equal participant. And so maybe the court as it is lined up now is not prepared to do that because we saw how they used personal beliefs to make that decision last summer, not actually rooted in history as much as Alito tried to cherry pick that. But it allows us to have a conversation about what equality means like we've had today. And so if you're having that active, ongoing conversation, you could really start poking holes into the assumptions and stereotypes. And not having laws be the way they are just because they've been this way. And so it allows us to dream, and a court can follow along. But David, I'm curious.
The Dobbs opinion included a paragraph about equality. There was a brief written by reproductive justice scholars, 3 law professors, who argued that the abortion right needs to be found under constitutional principles of equality. And Justice Alito's opinion sort of brushed that aside and said, no, it has nothing to do with equality. In 2 sentences. He responded to volumes and volumes of argument over years with 2 sentences. So no, I don't think this current Supreme Court would agree that the ERA protects the right to abortion, but I don't think that should stop anyone from making the argument, because it is absolutely essential that no one look at the Supreme Court and think it is fixed forever this way. It may take a long time for the court to change. I don't know, I can't see history, but it may change tomorrow. We have no idea. We need to be ready for that moment when opportunity strikes in our favor, and be ready with cases and issues to be heard by a more favorable Supreme Court when that comes. And again, that could come tomorrow, it could come in 10 years, it could come when in 50 years. But this court is going to change. And so it is, I think, misguided when we look at the court and think it is fixed forever against us.
Great.
You all have.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Chrissy.
I was just going to say, several people in the chat have asked for David's email. I don't know if you're comfortable making it public, but we have someone who has offered to forward emails to you.
Well, no, my email is public. I mean, I'm a professor, and the law school has my email address. So you can go to Drexel's website, dsc39@drexel.edu. Anyone who wants it can find it.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Allison McKinney, one of our coalition partners. What are the implications of the Dobbs decision rejecting advocates' argument that equal protection provides a constitutional basis for the right to abortion?
And that's what I was just talking about. And the implication is that it's going to be harder to get that in federal court. As you know, after Dobbs, there are people thinking about, well, maybe there are other ways to justify the right to abortion. Besides, abortion had been grounded in this idea of privacy for 50 years. And maybe there are better ways to do it. And one of the ways that a lot of people have looked to over the years is equality. And so with Justice Alito brushing that aside, it's going to be harder to make that argument now. But he did it in a way that wasn't fully developed. In technical legal terms, we call it dicta. It's not necessary for the decision of the case. So you could still make that argument in the lower courts, but you can also make it as a future-looking thing. But it also, importantly, doesn't stop people from making that argument in the public opinion, in legislatures, and in state courts. And so I don't think just because Justice Alito had a 10th grader's understanding of equality in that paragraph that we should abandon this argument. It's still a really important argument in favor of reproductive rights and justice.
David, I know some 10th graders who would give a much better understanding of equality than Justice Alito did. I just want to pop in to say, just to underscore, David said something in the beginning, state courts are weighing in. And there are beautiful quotes along the way in our history of recognizing access to abortion as central to equality, including our federal Supreme Court. But just, Ohio case the other day said, you're denied equal protection of law with respect to the fundamental right to privacy, procreation, bodily integrity. Like they packaged it all up. And so just because 5 justices, depending on how you count them, 5 to 6, said no, you should still be saying yes, because you know how equality is linked to your life. And so just to say that it is important to get out there, and we at the Law Center feel it is, we're not going to let them tell us that it's not.
Well, we are coming up at 4 o'clock, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but I do want to make sure that you're able to leave us with the last word of advice to our audience watching today. What do you think the audience's role should be in achieving sex equality and securing reproductive freedom? So what can people who are watching this take away to actually do to make sex equality and reproductive freedom real? David, you want to start there and we'll end with Marcella? I'm going to go down the line.
I think that probably the most important thing is that our movement has been so focused on courts for so long, and that there's so many more avenues of change. By necessity now we have to look beyond the federal courts, but there's so many other avenues: legislative, administrative, public opinion, and so all of it needs to be part of the toolbox. And so people are frustrated about the U.S. Supreme Court. We share your frustration, absolutely, but there's so many other ways to make change, especially when you think locally. And so I urge people to do that.
Layla?
Yeah, you have to be a part of this to restore the right to abortion. It includes the many different ways that our democracy is being threatened, and showing up and talking and donating. All of that is central to the future, and you got to keep going. If you had energy a few years ago and found that energy waning, you got to find it again, because this is 30 to 50 year thing, and future generations are really relying on it. And so this is not just about a law, but all of everything that we are all engaged in. And as a lawyer, I think it's all important.
Thank you. Marcella, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I think people have to really concentrate on voting. And I don't mean just the president and federal races. I'm talking about at the state legislative level, at the local level, judges. There are things that people don't necessarily concentrate on when they go in to vote. They look at the top of tickets and then they go, okay, that's the only people I know, so that's who I'm voting for. We now know that looking at these laws that are coming out of these states, that state legislatures are essential. And right now, conservatives, people who are opposed to abortion rights, people who are opposed to voting rights, people who are opposed to life-affirming care for LGBTQ people, all of those things are coming out of state legislatures. And we need to be fighting to make sure that those issues are addressed at that level, that we are putting the right people in those offices. So that's what I'd say. I hate to say vote, because that's what everybody says, but I'm saying very specifically, vote in those state races and those local races.
Well, you all have left us with a some very compelling thoughts that we should take with us into our communities. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So thank you for your questions. Thank you to our panelists and speakers for their insight and responses. Layla Abfalzi is Director of the Federal Reproductive Rights at the National Women's Law Center. David Cohen is a professor of law at Drexel University's Klein School of Law. And Marcella Howell is the founder and president, CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Thank you all so very much for being with us. We hope to see you all again for our next conversation, where we'll have more discussions throughout the year as we honor the 100 years of work towards sex equality and talking about why it's so important now. Thank you again to our panelists, and everyone have a wonderful day.